Chapter 1: A Quiet Friday Morning. Good evening, and welcome to the Silent Collection. Tonight, I invite you to leave behind the noise of the modern world for just a little while. Allow your shoulders to relax. Take a slow, comfortable breath and settle into whatever position feels most peaceful to you. Whether you are resting beneath warm blankets, listening beneath the gentle glow of a bedside lamp, or simply closing your eyes after a long day, I am grateful that you have chosen to spend this quiet evening here. Together, we will travel back through time, not with urgency, but with patience. History often feels loud. It is filled with great battles, powerful speeches, revolutions, discoveries, triumphs, and tragedies. Yet beneath those famous moments lies another history, one made of ordinary mornings, quiet conversations, familiar streets, and people who had no idea they were living through a day that future generations would remember forever. Tonight's journey brings us to one such day. It is Friday, the 22nd of November, 1963. Our destination is the city of Dallas in the American state of Texas. But before history changes forever, let us arrive gently. Imagine the first light of morning stretching across a wide Texas sky. The darkness slowly retreats as the sun climbs above the horizon, bathing the city in a warm golden glow. It is unusually mild for late November. There is a softness to the air, the kind of pleasant warmth that encourages people to linger outdoors just a little longer than they normally would. The streets gradually awaken. Delivery trucks make their early rounds through the city. Coffee shops begin serving their first customers of the day, filling the air with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Office workers straighten their jackets as they hurry toward tall buildings in the heart of downtown Dallas. Some carry newspapers tucked neatly beneath their arms. Others pause briefly at street corners, exchanging friendly greetings before continuing on with their morning. Children, excused from school for a special occasion, clutch small American flags made of thin wooden sticks and brightly colored paper. Many of them have never seen a president in person before. Their excitement is impossible to hide. Parents smile as they gently remind them to stay behind the barriers once the motorcade arrives. For them, this is not simply another Friday. It feels like a celebration. Across the city, police officers begin taking their assigned positions. Motorcycle officers prepare their machines. Secret Service agents quietly review the route one final time. To the casual observer, everything appears calm, orderly, and carefully planned. The visit has required weeks of preparation. Every turn of the presidential limousine has been mapped. Every intersection has been studied. Every minute has been scheduled. And yet, despite all of this planning, history has a way of ignoring even the most carefully written plans. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. For now, let us simply enjoy this peaceful morning. High above the streets, the windows of downtown office buildings reflect the brilliant Texas sunshine. The city feels alive, but never hurried. Church bells ring softly in the distance. Traffic flows steadily through broad avenues lined with trees whose autumn leaves still cling stubbornly to their branches. Shop owners unlock heavy wooden doors, sweep yesterday's dust from their entrances, and place fresh displays in their windows. Some glance toward the streets, already beginning to fill with spectators. Business today, they know, will be different. The President of the United States is coming. Only 3 years earlier, John Fitzgerald Kennedy had become one of the youngest men ever elected to the nation's highest office. To many Americans, he represented something entirely new. His youth, confidence, and eloquence had captured the imagination of millions. His administration spoke often of exploration, progress, and possibility. It was an era filled with both optimism and uncertainty. The Cold War cast a long shadow across the globe. Only a year earlier, the world had stood on the edge of nuclear conflict during the Cuban Missile Crisis. At home, the struggle for civil rights continued to reshape American society. There were disagreements, challenges, and difficult questions about the future. Yet despite these tensions, many still believed they were living through an age of extraordinary promise. President Kennedy himself often inspired that feeling. His speeches encouraged Americans to think not only about what their country could do for them, but what they could do for their country. Those words echoed far beyond the United States, becoming known throughout the world. On this November morning, however, politics feels strangely distant. The crowds gathering in Dallas are not thinking about international diplomacy or elections. They simply hope for a glimpse of the President and First Lady as their limousine passes by. Some have brought cameras. Others carry autograph books, though few expect an opportunity to use them. Many simply wish to wave, to smile, to witness a moment they might one day tell their grandchildren about. Several miles away, another building quietly begins its workday. The Texas School Book Depository stands overlooking Dealey Plaza. Its brick walls appear no different from countless other warehouses scattered across American cities. Inside, employees move boxes of textbooks, preparing shipments for schools throughout Texas. The work is ordinary, routine, predictable. No one entering the building that morning could possibly know that, before the day is over, the world would forever remember this address. History often hides itself within the ordinary. It rarely announces its arrival. Instead, it waits quietly in familiar places, among everyday people, on mornings that begin like any other. As the hours pass, the streets grow steadily more crowded. Families continue arriving. Office workers lean from windows high above the sidewalks. Journalists prepare notebooks. Photographers check their cameras one final time. Excitement gently builds with every passing minute. Somewhere in the distance, the unmistakable sound of aircraft engines begins to echo through the Texas sky. Air Force One is approaching Love Field. The President's Day in Dallas is about to begin. And with it, one of the most significant chapters in modern history. But for now, the city waits. Patiently, quietly, entirely unaware of what the afternoon will bring. As we close this first chapter of our journey, allow your breathing to become a little slower. Imagine the warm Texas sunshine, the gentle murmur of the growing crowd, and the peaceful rhythm of an ordinary morning suspended in time. In our next chapter, we will accompany President Kennedy as he arrives in Dallas, greets the welcoming crowds, and begins the motorcade that history would never forget. For now, rest comfortably. The story has only just begun. Chapter 2, A President on the Move. If you have only just joined us, welcome to the Silent Collection, where we gently wander through the quiet corridors of history, one peaceful story at a time. As always, there is no need to hurry. There are no questions waiting to be answered. No destination that must be reached before morning. Only the comforting rhythm of history unfolding slowly, one page at a time. If your eyes have already begun to feel heavy, then simply allow the words to drift over you like the turning of distant pages in an old library. And now, let us return to the morning of Friday, November the 22nd, 1963. As the first chapter of our journey came to a close, the people of Dallas waited patiently beneath the warm Texas sky. Some stood on sidewalks. Others leaned from office windows. Children shifted excitedly from one foot to the other, gripping small paper flags that fluttered gently in the breeze. The city carried an unmistakable feeling of anticipation. Although Dallas was one of the largest cities in Texas, moments like this remained uncommon. A visit from the President of the United States transformed an ordinary Friday into something people would remember for years. Many had arrived hours before the scheduled motorcade. Some brought folding chairs. Others carried picnic lunches. Office workers found reasons to step away from their desks for a few precious minutes. Store owners stood in their doorways, watching as the sidewalks gradually became more crowded. There was conversation everywhere. People wondered how close they might be able to stand. Whether the president would wave. Whether Mrs. Kennedy would be wearing one of her elegant dresses. Whether the weather would remain as pleasant as it was now. History, of course, remained perfectly silent. Nearly 10 miles away, preparations were also reaching their final stages at Love Field, the airport where Air Force One would soon arrive. Secret Service agents spoke quietly into handheld radios. Police officers reviewed security plans. Airport staff completed final inspections. Everything followed a carefully rehearsed schedule. The presidential aircraft itself had become an instantly recognizable symbol around the world. Although the name Air Force One technically referred to any Air Force aircraft carrying the president, many Americans had come to associate it with the gleaming blue and white Boeing that transporting President Kennedy across the country. Its elegant blue stripe, polished metal fuselage, and the presidential seal painted proudly beside the doorway reflected a new image of American leadership, modern, confident, and unmistakably recognizable. Inside the aircraft, the atmosphere was surprisingly relaxed. The president had already visited several Texas cities during the trip. San Antonio, Houston, Fort Worth. Each stop had been filled with enthusiastic crowds. The Dallas visit was expected to continue that success. John Fitzgerald Kennedy had always enjoyed meeting ordinary people. Unlike some political leaders who preferred distance and formality, Kennedy often moved naturally toward crowds. He understood the value of simply shaking hands, looking people in the eye, smiling, listening even if only for a brief moment. These small encounters left lasting impressions. Many who met him would later remember not what he said, but how he made them feel. Calm, important, sane. Beside him sat First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy. Graceful, poised, and admired around the world, Jacqueline had become one of the most recognizable women of her generation. Her appreciation for art, architecture, literature, and culture had transformed the White House into more than simply the residence of an American president. She believed history should be preserved, that beautiful objects told important stories, that future generations deserved to understand the past through the treasures left behind. In many ways, she was a historian herself. Though she rarely sought the spotlight, her influence reached far beyond fashion magazines and newspaper photographs. She encouraged Americans to appreciate their country's cultural heritage with fresh eyes. Her calm elegance became one of the defining images of the early 1960s. That morning, she wore the outfit that would later become forever associated with this day. A bright pink suit, carefully tailored, accompanied by white gloves and a matching pillbox hat. At the time, it was simply another carefully chosen ensemble. No one imagined that photographs of it would become some of the most recognized images in modern history. As Air Force One descended toward Love Field, the view from above revealed the sprawling city of Dallas stretching across the Texas landscape. Roads wound between neighborhoods. Railway lines crossed industrial districts. Church steeples rose above residential streets. Beyond them lay open land that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. The city was growing rapidly. New businesses appeared each year. Modern office buildings stood beside older brick structures that had witnessed decades of change. Dallas represented a confident America, a nation looking toward the future. At precisely 11:37 in the morning, Air Force One touched down smoothly on the runway. Its engines gradually slowed. Ground crews moved efficiently into position. The aircraft taxied toward the waiting reception area. Outside, hundreds of spectators stood behind barriers, eager for even a brief glimpse of the president. The aircraft door opened. A portable staircase was rolled into place. Then, just as countless cameras began clicking almost simultaneously, President Kennedy emerged into the bright Texas sunshine. He smiled immediately, not because someone had instructed him to, but because smiling seemed to come naturally. Behind him appeared Jacqueline Kennedy. Her pink suit stood out vividly against the pale blue sky. The crowd erupted into applause. Cheers echoed across the airport. Some called out the president's name. Others simply waved enthusiastically. Kennedy paused before descending the steps. He looked toward the gathering of well-wishers. Then, instead of moving directly toward the waiting limousine, he walked toward the crowd. Secret Service agents exchanged quick glances. This was typical. The president often preferred to greet people personally whenever possible. He shook dozens of hands, accepted flowers from admirers, signed a few programs and scraps of paper. For several unhurried minutes, politics disappeared entirely. There was only a man meeting his fellow citizens. Nearby, photographers captured image after image. Many of those photographs remain remarkably peaceful. Smiling faces, children perched on parents' shoulders, the president laughing, Jacqueline accepting a bouquet of roses. No sign of tension, no visible concern, only a welcoming crowd enjoying an unusually pleasant November afternoon. Looking back today, these photographs possess a quiet poignancy, not because anything alarming can be seen within them. Quite the opposite. They capture complete normality, a morning untouched by the knowledge of what would come only hours later. History often grants us this gift. Old photographs remind us that people living through famous events never knew they were standing at the edge of history. They were simply living another day. Eventually, it was time to depart the airport. Waiting nearby was the presidential limousine. Unlike the heavily armored presidential vehicles used today, this limousine had been designed to allow the public to see their president clearly. Its roof section could be removed. On pleasant days such as this one, officials often chose to leave the vehicle completely open. It allowed crowds a better view. It also allowed photographers clearer pictures. Few questioned the decision. Presidential security in the early 1960s operated very differently from the extensive protections familiar today. America had experienced tragedy before, but the office of the presidency still felt remarkably accessible. Citizens expected to see their president, to wave, perhaps even shake hands. The relationship between leader and public felt unusually close. That openness reflected the optimism of the era. Governor John Connally of Texas and his wife Nellie approached the limousine. Connally had once served as Secretary of the Navy and was now one of Texas's most influential political figures. Friendly and experienced, he would accompany the president throughout the motorcade. After brief introductions and a few quiet conversations, everyone took their assigned seats. Secret Service agents performed one final visual inspection. Motorcycle officers started their engines. Police vehicles moved into position. The carefully rehearsed procession slowly came to life. At precisely 11:55 in the morning, the motorcade departed Love Field. The journey through Dallas had begun. For those watching along the route, it would become one of the most unforgettable processions in American history. Yet at that very moment, none of the thousands lining the streets saw anything unusual. They simply saw a smiling president, a gracious first lady, a bright blue sky, and a city filled with hope. As we gently close this chapter, imagine the long line of polished automobiles gliding through the sunlit streets. The motorcycles hum steadily. The crowd waves with cheerful excitement. Children sit high upon their parents' shoulders. Camera shutters click softly in the distance. Everything feels calm. Everything feels ordinary. History still waits patiently just beyond the next turn. And as your breathing grows slower and your thoughts become quieter, allow yourself to drift peacefully beside the motorcade as it continues through Dallas. In our next chapter, we will follow its slow journey through the city streets, where warm welcomes, smiling faces, and gentle autumn sunshine accompany every passing mile. For now, simply rest and let history carry you forward. Chapter 3: Through the Streets of Dallas. Take another slow, gentle breath. Allow your thoughts to become a little quieter. If sleep has already begun to find you, there is no need to resist it. The story will continue whether you are fully awake or peacefully drifting between waking and dreams. Here within the silent collection, there is no rush. History has waited many years for us. It can wait a little longer. The presidential motorcade rolled steadily away from Love Field, its polished automobiles gliding through the wide streets of Dallas with quiet confidence. The motorcycles rode in perfect formation. Their engines produced a steady, comforting hum that echoed gently between buildings before fading into the distance. Spectators lined nearly every section of the route. Some had climbed onto low stone walls for a better view. Others stood patiently on sidewalks, holding children by the hand. Many had brought cameras, hoping to preserve a single moment that would one day become a treasured family memory. For countless people, this would be the closest they would ever come to seeing an American president. And so they smiled. They waved. They called out warm greetings as the limousine passed. President Kennedy sat upright in the rear of the open limousine, acknowledging the crowds with a relaxed wave. He had developed a remarkable ability over the years to make large gatherings feel personal. Rather than offering hurried gestures, he often appeared to focus on individual faces. A brief smile, a nod of appreciation, a raised hand directed toward someone standing in the crowd. These small moments created lasting memories. Years later, many people would still recall exactly where they had been standing when the president looked in their direction. Whether or not he had actually seen them almost seemed unimportant. For a brief instant, it felt as though he had. Beside him, Jacqueline Kennedy admired the city as it unfolded around them. The First Lady possessed a quiet curiosity wherever she traveled. She appreciated architecture, gardens, museums, and the unique character of every place she visited. Dallas, with its broad avenues, modern buildings, and proud Texan identity, offered something distinctly different from Washington. She waved gracefully to the crowds, her white gloves catching the sunlight as photographers eagerly captured image after image. Many who witnessed the procession later remarked upon her elegance. She appeared calm, comfortable, at ease. Governor John Connolly and his wife Nellie occupied the seats directly ahead of the President and First Lady. From time to time, conversation flowed naturally between the two couples. The atmosphere inside the limousine remained surprisingly informal. There were moments of quiet discussion, occasional laughter, long pauses spent simply observing the welcoming crowds. It was, by every appearance, a pleasant drive through a city eager to greet its guests. As the procession moved deeper into Dallas, familiar landmarks appeared one after another. Storefront windows reflected the afternoon sunlight. Street signs marked intersections, now forever linked to history. Office buildings cast long shadows across busy sidewalks. Traffic had been carefully managed to allow the motorcade to move smoothly, though it traveled at a deliberately modest pace. The slower speed allowed people more time to see the president. It also gave the president more opportunity to acknowledge those who had gathered. There was something almost leisurely about the journey. No one appeared hurried. Even the motorcycles maintained a graceful rhythm, never rushing ahead, never falling behind. Far above the streets, office workers gathered near windows. Some had paused important meetings. Others had stepped away from telephones and paperwork. The chance to see the president pass below was simply too unusual to miss. Several employees opened windows despite the mild autumn air. They leaned carefully outward, waving as the motorcade moved beneath them. From above, the procession resembled a slow-moving ribbon of polished steel and flashing motorcycle lights weaving through the city. Dallas itself had become one of America's fastest-growing cities during the years following the Second World War. New neighborhoods stretched farther outward each year. Businesses prospered. Families arrived from across the country seeking opportunity. The skyline continued to change as new office towers rose above older brick buildings constructed decades earlier. There was a sense of confidence in the city. Like much of America during the early 1960s, Dallas believed the future held enormous promise. Of course, like every growing city, it also carried its disagreements. Political opinions varied widely. Some citizens strongly supported President Kennedy. Others criticized his policies. A small number had even organized protests ahead of his visit. Yet on this particular afternoon, those differences seemed quieter than expected. Most of the people lining the streets had come simply to witness a moment of history. Many applauded warmly as the motorcade passed. Some called out greetings. Others simply watched in respectful silence. History is often remembered through its dramatic moments. Yet it is worth remembering that most of the afternoon was remarkably peaceful. Mile after mile, the procession continued without incident. Meanwhile, far ahead along the planned route, another part of the city remained comparatively calm. Dealey Plaza. Unlike the busy commercial streets the motorcade had already traveled, this area possessed a more open feeling. Roadways curved gently around landscaped lawns. Railway tracks stretched beyond the plaza toward the horizon. Tall buildings overlooked the intersection from several directions. Among them stood the Texas School Book Depository. To anyone passing by, it appeared entirely ordinary. Its red brick walls had watched over the neighborhood for many years. Employees worked inside among shelves and stacks of textbooks destined for classrooms across Texas. There was nothing about the building that suggested it would soon become one of the most recognized locations in modern history. It was simply another workplace, another address, another ordinary part of the city. History often chooses ordinary places. Back along the motorcade route, excitement remained high. Children waved flags enthusiastically whenever the president looked in their direction. Parents lifted younger children onto their shoulders so they could see over the crowd. Some elderly spectators smiled quietly, remembering earlier presidential visits from decades gone by. Others experienced this moment for the very first time. Photographers continued documenting nearly every second. Many of their images survive today. Looking at them now feels almost dreamlike. The faces are filled with joy. No one appears frightened. No one senses what lies only minutes ahead. The photographs preserve something precious. The final moments of an ordinary afternoon before history changed. Inside the limousine, President Kennedy remained remarkably relaxed. Those who knew him often remarked that he enjoyed these opportunities to connect directly with the public. Campaign speeches and official meetings served their purpose. But seeing ordinary citizens smiling from sidewalks and windows offered something different. It reminded him why public service mattered. Every wave represented a person. Every handshake represented a family. Every cheering voice represented hopes for the future. Perhaps that was why he smiled so often during these public appearances. Not because they were carefully choreographed, but because they allowed genuine human connection. The gentle Texas breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves and freshly cut grass. Sunlight reflected softly from polished chrome and glass. The sky remained beautifully clear. If someone had painted the afternoon onto a canvas, they could hardly have chosen more pleasant weather. Even decades later, many witnesses would describe the same detail first. It was such a beautiful day. Sometimes history's most difficult moments arrive beneath the brightest skies. The route gradually brought the procession closer to the heart of downtown. The buildings grew taller. The streets narrowed briefly before opening once more. Police officers remained visible at major intersections, calmly directing the limited traffic that remained. Everything appeared exactly as planners had intended. The schedule remained almost perfectly on time. There was no sense of urgency, no indication that anything unusual was about to occur. Only the steady movement of the presidential limousine through a welcoming city. As we slowly bring this chapter to a close, imagine yourself standing quietly among the crowd. Feel the gentle warmth of the November sunshine. Hear the distant hum of motorcycle engines. Watch as smiling faces turn toward the approaching limousine. Notice the sound of children laughing somewhere nearby. A paper flag flutters softly in the breeze. The president raises his hand in greeting once more. The procession continues at its unhurried pace, drawing ever closer to Dealey Plaza. There is still peace, still calm, still the comforting rhythm of an ordinary afternoon. In our next chapter, we will arrive at Dealey Plaza itself, a place that, on this day, would become forever woven into the story of the 20th century. We will remain true to our gentle pace, focusing not on sensationalism, but on the people, the place, and the profound moment that would leave an enduring mark on history. For now, allow the quiet streets of Dallas to fade gently into the distance. Rest comfortably, and let the pages of history continue to turn, one peaceful moment at a time. Chapter 4, Dealey Plaza. By now, perhaps the room around you has grown a little quieter. The day's responsibilities have faded into the background. Your breathing has become slower. Your thoughts have become lighter. If you are already drifting towards sleep, simply allow this story to become part of your dreams, carrying you gently through another page of history. Tonight, we continue our quiet journey through Dallas, Texas, on the afternoon of Friday, November the 22nd, 1963. The presidential motorcade had now traveled several miles through the city. Everything had unfolded almost exactly as planned. Crowds had smiled. Children had waved their tiny American flags with endless enthusiasm. The president had greeted thousands of people, often raising his hand in a relaxed and familiar gesture that had become instantly recognizable throughout the world. For those lining the streets, it had been a memorable afternoon. Some would later preserve photographs in family albums. Others would recount the experience to children and grandchildren for decades to come. At this moment, however, no one was thinking about history. They were simply enjoying a beautiful November day. The route now approached a place known as Dealey Plaza. To understand why this location became so significant, it helps to picture it not as a monument, but as it appeared on that ordinary Friday afternoon. Dealey Plaza sat near the western edge of downtown Dallas, where several roads gently converged before continuing beneath a railway overpass. Unlike the busier commercial streets the motorcade had traveled earlier, this area felt surprisingly open. There were grassy lawns bordered by neat pathways. Rows of mature oak trees provided patches of welcome shade. Low stone walls framed sections of carefully maintained landscaping. Traffic moved steadily but calmly through the broad intersections. Nearby stood a collection of buildings that reflected different chapters of Dallas's history. Some were modern office buildings with large windows that caught the afternoon sunlight. Others were older brick warehouses that had served the growing city for decades. One of those buildings, standing quietly at the corner of Elm and Houston Streets, was the Texas School Book Depository. Its appearance was entirely unremarkable. Red brick, large rectangular windows, several stories tall. It blended naturally into the surrounding cityscape. Nothing about it suggested that people around the world would soon learn its name. For many residents of Dallas, Dealey Plaza was simply another familiar part of the city. Office workers crossed it every day. Drivers passed through without giving it much thought. Families occasionally paused nearby while exploring downtown. History had not yet claimed it. It remained simply a place filled with ordinary sounds. The distant rumble of traffic, the occasional whistle of a passing train, birds calling softly from the trees, the quiet rustling of leaves stirred by a gentle Texas breeze. If you close your eyes for a moment, you might imagine standing there yourself. The warmth of the afternoon sun rests comfortably upon your shoulders. Somewhere nearby, a child laughs. A newspaper flutters briefly across the pavement before settling again. Nothing feels unusual. Nothing feels hurried. The motorcade continued toward the plaza at a relaxed pace. Police motorcycles remained in careful formation. Behind them followed the presidential limousine, its polished black paint reflecting flashes of sunlight as it rounded each gradual bend in the road. Following close behind were additional vehicles carrying Secret Service agents, government officials, journalists, photographers, and members of the White House staff. Each driver maintained careful spacing. Months of planning had produced a procession that moved with quiet precision. To spectators, it almost appeared effortless. As the president's limousine entered the area surrounding Dealey Plaza, more people gathered along the sidewalks. Some stood beneath the shade of large trees. Others found places atop small grassy slopes that overlooked the roadway. Several photographers prepared their cameras. News cameramen adjusted their equipment one final time. Among them was Abraham Zapruder, a local clothing manufacturer who had brought along his home movie camera after deciding that such an important occasion deserved to be recorded. He found a stable position atop a low concrete pedestal near the roadway. Like everyone else, he expected to capture a pleasant presidential visit. His short film would later become one of the most studied pieces of motion picture footage in history. Yet at this moment, he simply waited patiently. Inside the limousine, conversation continued naturally. Governor John Connally occasionally pointed out landmarks. President Kennedy continued acknowledging spectators on both sides of the road. Jacqueline Kennedy smiled warmly as bouquets, waves, and friendly greetings accompanied the procession. The atmosphere remained calm, almost festive. The sounds of cheering drifted gently through the open air. There was no roof above the passengers, no glass separating them from the public. The openness reflected a different era, an era when Americans often expected to see their president close enough to wave, smile, or perhaps even shake hands. Security certainly existed, but it looked very different from the protective measures familiar today. The relationship between public leaders and ordinary citizens felt more immediate, more personal. The limousine approached the intersection of Houston Street and Elm Street. Here, the route required a slow, sweeping turn. The driver eased gently around the corner. The movement was smooth and unhurried. As the vehicle completed the turn, it began traveling downhill along Elm Street. The crowds remained enthusiastic. People continued waving from both sides of the road. Some smiled broadly. Others raised cameras for what they believed would be one final photograph before the procession disappeared beneath the nearby railway bridge. No one could know that these next few moments would become among the most examined in modern history. At approximately 12:30 in the afternoon, the peaceful rhythm of the day changed forever. Witnesses heard a sharp sound. Many later recalled that they did not immediately recognize it. Some believed it had come from a motorcycle. Others thought perhaps someone had set off a firecracker. Several people instinctively looked toward the railway bridge. Others turned toward nearby buildings. Confusion spread far more quickly than understanding. Within moments, additional shots followed. The calm atmosphere dissolved into uncertainty. People began ducking for cover. Parents instinctively reached for their children. Police officers looked in every direction, attempting to identify where the sounds had originated. Across Dealey Plaza, confusion became the overwhelming emotion. Few people understood exactly what had happened. Many later described those first seconds not as fear, but as disbelief. Surely this could not be happening. Not here. Not during a presidential visit. The presidential limousine accelerated rapidly toward Parkland Memorial Hospital. Secret Service agents reacted immediately, moving to protect the occupants of the vehicle as it left the plaza. The motorcycles increased their speed. Police officers began securing the surrounding area. Within only a few moments, the procession had disappeared from sight. The plaza that had been filled with cheerful anticipation only seconds earlier now stood in stunned silence. Some witnesses remained frozen where they stood. Others comforted strangers. Many pointed toward different locations, each believing the sounds had come from a different direction. The uncertainty of those first minutes would later become an important part of the many investigations that followed. Human memory, especially during moments of sudden shock, is often imperfect. Different people remembered different details. That is a natural part of experiencing unexpected events. As emergency responders rushed into action, ordinary citizens also found themselves helping however they could. Some guided frightened children away from the crowds. Others attempted to assist police officers by describing what they believed they had seen or heard. Doctors, nurses, police officers, Secret Service agents, journalists, and bystanders all became part of the same rapidly unfolding story. No one yet knew the full picture. Only one thing seemed certain. Something extraordinary had just taken place. Back across the nation, life continued normally. Teachers taught lessons. Factories continued producing goods. Families prepared lunch. Millions of Americans remained completely unaware that history had just shifted beneath their feet. Within minutes, however, radio stations would interrupt their regular broadcasts. Television networks would begin receiving urgent reports from Dallas. Newspapers would halt their printing presses. The news was already beginning its journey across the country. But for this brief moment, the rest of America still carried on with an ordinary Friday afternoon. It is one of history's quietest contrasts. A single place can change forever while the wider world remains, for a few precious moments, blissfully unaware. As we gently close this chapter, allow yourself to imagine the plaza once more. The oak trees stand quietly beneath the warm afternoon sun. A soft breeze stirs the leaves. The roads, now empty, curve peacefully beneath the railway bridge. The excitement of the morning has given way to an unexpected stillness. History has turned another page. And although many questions remain to be answered, tonight we leave this place not with alarm, but with quiet reflection. In our next chapter, we will follow the motorcade to Parkland Memorial Hospital, where doctors, nurses, and officials worked with urgency as news of the day's events slowly spread across America and beyond. For now, rest peacefully, breathe slowly, and allow the echoes of this quiet afternoon to fade gently into the distance as our journey through history continues. Chapter 5: A Nation Holds Its Breath. If you're still awake, I'm glad you're here. And if sleep is beginning to find you, then simply allow these words to become part of the quiet background, like the soft turning of pages in an old book. There is nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to solve, only a gentle journey through history, unfolding one peaceful moment at a time. As the presidential limousine sped away from Dealey Plaza, its destination was clear. Only a few miles away stood Parkland Memorial Hospital, one of Dallas's largest hospitals and a respected center for emergency care. Drivers along the route were quickly moved aside. Police motorcycles cleared intersections. Sirens echoed across the city. The journey that had begun as a ceremonial procession had become an urgent race against time. Inside the limousine, Secret Service agents did everything they could to protect its occupants as it rushed toward the hospital. The streets that had only moments earlier been filled with waving crowds now blurred past in hurried silence. At Parkland Memorial Hospital, the afternoon had begun much like any other. Doctors were meeting with colleagues. Nurses checked on patients recovering from surgery. Receptionists answered telephones. Medical students discussed their lessons in quiet hallways. The hospital moved with its usual rhythm. Busy, professional, orderly. Then, without warning, that rhythm changed. Emergency staff received word that the President of the United States was on his way. Within moments, doctors and nurses began moving swiftly toward the emergency department. Equipment was prepared. Trauma rooms were cleared. Medical teams assembled almost instinctively. Training took over. Whatever else was happening outside those hospital walls, their responsibility remained the same. Help the patient before them. When the motorcade arrived, there was little time for ceremony. President Kennedy was carried quickly into Trauma Room 1. Nearby, Governor John Connally was taken to a separate treatment room, where another team of doctors immediately began caring for him. Outside the emergency entrance, Secret Service agents established security while hospital staff continued their work with remarkable focus. Inside the treatment rooms, every minute mattered. Doctors consulted one another. Nurses prepared instruments. Specialists were called. No one stopped to consider the historical significance of the moment. They simply concentrated on doing everything their profession required. Years later, many members of the medical staff would recall the extraordinary calm that settled over the rooms. Not because the situation itself was calm, but because medicine often demands quiet concentration, even during the most difficult circumstances. Beyond the hospital doors, however, uncertainty continued to grow. Word spread rapidly among police officers, journalists, government officials, bystanders. People gathered outside the hospital without fully understanding what had happened. Some believed the president had been only slightly injured. Others feared something much worse. Rumors moved far more quickly than facts. One person claimed the president was recovering. Another insisted he had spoken. A third believed everything had been exaggerated. In moments of great uncertainty, people naturally search for reassuring answers. That afternoon, very few answers existed. Inside newsrooms across Dallas, telephones rang continuously. Reporters hurried from one desk to another. Editors interrupted scheduled broadcasts. Camera crews rushed toward Parkland Hospital. In 1963, there was no internet. No smartphones. No instant notifications appearing on millions of screens. Instead, information traveled through radio, television, and telephone. Journalists worked tirelessly to verify every detail before announcing it to the public. Accuracy mattered, especially on a day such as this. Across the United States, ordinary life continued for a little while longer. In classrooms, children copied arithmetic problems onto lined paper. Factory workers assembled automobiles. Shopkeepers greeted customers. Office workers sorted documents. Many people remained completely unaware that one of the most significant moments in modern American history had already begun. Then the first news bulletins interrupted regular programming. A calm radio announcer informed listeners that reports from Dallas suggested the president had been injured. Television stations followed soon afterward. Programs were interrupted. Music stopped. Familiar news anchors appeared unexpectedly on screen. Their expressions alone suggested that something extraordinary had happened. In homes across America, families gathered around television sets. Some watched in complete silence. Others stood close to their radios, listening carefully for every new update. Neighbors visited one another. Telephones rang. Questions were asked. Very few could be answered. How serious were the injuries? Was the president conscious? Would he recover? No one outside the hospital knew. The entire nation seemed suspended in a moment of waiting. Within Parkland Hospital, doctors continued their efforts with determination and professionalism. They worked together as a single team. Every decision was made as carefully and quickly as circumstances allowed. Their responsibility was not to history. Their responsibility was to their patient. Those who later reflected on that afternoon often spoke of the remarkable dedication displayed by everyone involved. Doctors, nurses, technicians, orderlies. Every individual focused completely upon the task before them. Regardless of the outcome, they knew they had a duty to perform. And they performed it with extraordinary commitment. Time passed differently inside the hospital. Minutes seemed unusually long. Hallway clocks continued ticking with quiet precision. Outside, the November sunshine still filled the city. Inside, the atmosphere had become one of solemn concentration. Government officials arrived. Secret Service agents quietly moved through corridors. Hospital administrators coordinated with law enforcement. Journalists waited patiently beyond the restricted areas, hoping for reliable information. Everyone understood that history was unfolding within those walls. Yet no one could hurry its course. Shortly after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the difficult news became official. Despite every effort made by the medical team, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy had died from his injuries. He was 46 years old. The announcement was delivered with dignity and respect. There was no celebration of headlines, no dramatic language, only the quiet acknowledgement that the United States had lost its 35th president. For those present inside the hospital, the moment was deeply emotional. Many members of the staff had entered medicine to save lives. On this day, despite every possible effort, they could not change the course of history. News organizations moved carefully before broadcasting the announcement. Verification was essential. Then, almost simultaneously, television and radio networks informed the nation. One by one, familiar voices shared the heartbreaking news. Across America, conversations stopped. Factories fell unusually quiet. Schools dismissed classes early. Churches opened their doors for those wishing to pray or simply sit in silence. Flags began to be lowered to half-staff. Even people who had disagreed with President Kennedy's policies often found themselves deeply saddened. Political differences seemed less important in moments of national grief. For a little while, Americans mourned together. Around the world, similar scenes unfolded. Embassies received urgent messages. Foreign governments prepared official statements. Newspapers rushed to print special editions. In cities thousands of miles from Dallas, people gathered around radios exactly as Americans had done. President Kennedy had become one of the world's most recognizable leaders. His death was not only an American tragedy. It was international news. From London to Tokyo, from Paris to Sydney, from Cape Town to Buenos Aires, the same questions echoed around the globe. How could such a thing happen? Yet tonight, as we tell this story together, we need not search for every answer. History has spent decades asking difficult questions. Instead, we pause here to reflect upon something quieter. How quickly an ordinary afternoon can change. Only a few hours earlier, children had laughed beside the streets of Dallas. Families had waved paper flags. The city had welcomed its guests beneath clear blue skies. Now that same afternoon had become one of the most remembered days of the 20th century. History often turns not with great fanfare, but in quiet moments that no one expects. As we bring this chapter gently to a close, imagine the sun beginning its slow descent across the Dallas skyline. The excitement of the morning has faded. The city has grown quieter. Hospital corridors become still. Outside, people speak softly, if they speak at all. Across America, living rooms glow with the gentle light of television screens as families sit together, absorbing news they never imagined they would hear. Take one more slow breath. Allow the stillness of this moment to settle gently around you. In our next chapter, we will follow the story as it moves beyond the hospital walls, to the search for answers, the investigation that began almost immediately, and the remarkable events that unfolded during the hours that followed. For now, Rest peacefully. The night grows quieter. And here, within the silent collection, another page of history has been carefully turned. Chapter 6: The Search for Answers. The evening has grown a little older now. Perhaps the world outside your window has become quieter. The traffic has faded into the distance. The lights in neighboring homes have begun to disappear, one by one. If sleep has not yet found you, there is no need to chase it. Simply continue listening, allowing history to unfold at its own gentle pace. We remain in Dallas on one of the most consequential afternoons of the 20th century. As the news of President Kennedy's death spread across the United States, another story was quietly unfolding throughout the streets of Dallas. Police officers, investigators, and Secret Service agents began the difficult task of understanding exactly what had happened. In moments of great uncertainty, there is often a natural desire to find answers quickly. But history rarely reveals itself all at once. Instead, it offers pieces, small observations, witness accounts, photographs, documents, moments remembered differently by different people. Like pages scattered from an old journal, each must be gathered carefully before the larger story begins to emerge. Back in Dealey Plaza, the crowds had gradually dispersed. The laughter and excitement of the morning had vanished, replaced by an unusual stillness. Police officers secured the area. Investigators moved methodically through the plaza, carefully noting positions, examining evidence, and speaking with those who had witnessed the events. Many bystanders remained nearby, hoping they might somehow help. Some pointed toward buildings. Others described sounds they believed they had heard. Many admitted they simply did not know. And that uncertainty itself became part of the day's history. One building soon attracted particular attention: the Texas School Book Depository. Earlier that morning, it had been little more than a familiar workplace where employees handled shipments of textbooks destined for classrooms across Texas. Now investigators entered its quiet hallways with great care. The building itself seemed almost unchanged. Wooden floors creaked beneath measured footsteps. Sunlight filtered gently through large windows. Cardboard boxes remained stacked in orderly rows, just as workers had left them. Yet everyone entering the building understood that it might hold important clues. Employees who had been working inside were asked to remain available for questioning. Police officers moved from floor to floor. They spoke quietly with workers, noting where each person had been during the motorcade. Most answered calmly. Some appeared understandably shaken. No one yet knew exactly what investigators would discover. The atmosphere inside the building remained remarkably composed. Professional. Deliberate. Every observation mattered. Every detail was recorded. Meanwhile, across Dallas, law enforcement officers received descriptions from witnesses and followed numerous leads. Like many large cities, Dallas was filled with thousands of people going about their ordinary lives. Finding accurate information required patience. Radio messages passed continually between patrol cars. Descriptions were shared. Possible sightings were reported. Investigators worked steadily, never knowing which piece of information might prove significant. As afternoons slowly gave way to evening, attention increasingly focused on one former employee of the Texas School Book Depository. His name was Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald was 24 years old. He had served in the United States Marine Corps before spending a period of time living in the Soviet Union during the late 1950s. Eventually, he returned to the United States with his wife, Marina, and resumed civilian life. His background was unusual, and in the tense atmosphere of the Cold War, it naturally drew investigators' attention. What mattered most to detectives, however, was not speculation, but evidence. They worked carefully to establish facts. Where had he been? Who had seen him? What could be confirmed? Later that afternoon, events unfolded rapidly. Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit encountered a man believed to match the description investigators were seeking. A confrontation followed, and Officer Tippit was tragically killed. The loss of another life on this already heartbreaking day deepened the sense of shock throughout the city. Police immediately intensified their search. Descriptions of the suspect were broadcast across Dallas. Officers from multiple departments joined the effort. Roads were watched. Neighborhoods were searched. Information arrived from citizens eager to assist. Not long afterward, reports reached police that a man matching the description had entered the Texas Theater, a neighborhood cinema where a film was already in progress. The theater itself offered a peaceful escape from the outside world. Inside, the audience sat quietly in dim light, watching the screen as the story unfolded before them. Many had no idea that outside, history was moving with astonishing speed. Police officers entered carefully. The manager assisted them in identifying the individual they sought. Rows of seats stretched into the darkness. Flashlights pierced the dim interior. The quiet atmosphere contrasted sharply with the urgency of the search. When officers approached the suspect, a struggle followed before he was taken into custody. He was arrested alive and escorted from the theater. Outside, photographers and journalists had already gathered. Camera flashbulbs illuminated the evening. Questions came rapidly from every direction. Yet very few answers could be offered at that moment. The investigation had only just begun. As news spread that a suspect had been arrested, Americans across the country listened closely. Many hoped that understanding what had happened might somehow make sense of the day's unimaginable events. Television stations continued their nearly uninterrupted coverage. Journalists worked around the clock. Radio announcers updated listeners whenever new information became available. It was one of the first moments in history when millions of people followed a major national event almost continuously through live television. For many families, the television remained switched on for days. Meals were eaten in front of the screen. Visitors gathered in living rooms. Children watched quietly beside their parents. The nation seemed united by a shared search for understanding. Within Dallas Police Headquarters, investigators began questioning Oswald. He denied responsibility for the assassination. During brief encounters with reporters, he made a statement that would be remembered for generations. He said that he was just a patsy, suggesting that he believed he had been unfairly accused. Those few words would echo through history. For decades afterward, they would be quoted in books, documentaries, newspaper articles, and countless discussions about the assassination. Investigators, however, continued their work without drawing immediate conclusions. Their task was to gather evidence, compare witness statements, and reconstruct the events of the day as accurately as possible. History demands patience, careful investigation, and a willingness to distinguish between what is known, what is likely, and what remains uncertain. Meanwhile, a very different scene unfolded hundreds of miles away in Washington, D.C. Government officials prepared for a transition of leadership unlike any they had hoped to experience. The United States Constitution provided a clear path for continuity, even during moments of profound tragedy. Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson would soon become president. Aboard Air Force One, preparations quietly began. The aircraft, which had carried President Kennedy to Texas only hours earlier, would now carry his successor back to the nation's capital. The symbolism of that journey was not lost on anyone aboard. It marked both an ending and a beginning. As evening settled over Dallas, the city itself seemed transformed. The busy streets had grown noticeably quieter. The crowds were gone. Police vehicles remained visible near important locations. Journalists continued filing reports late into the night. Office lights burned long after sunset in newspaper buildings and government offices. The city had awakened that morning expecting celebration. It would go to sleep carrying the weight of history. Looking back today, historians often remind us that the hours immediately following any major historical event are rarely as clear as they later appear in books. People remember different details. Information changes as new evidence emerges. Early reports are sometimes corrected. That is not unusual. It is simply the nature of history being lived rather than remembered. The task of historians is not merely to repeat stories. It is to examine them carefully, compare sources, and build the most accurate understanding possible. That careful process would continue for years after November 22, 1963. As we gently bring this chapter to a close, imagine Dallas beneath the quiet evening sky. Streetlights cast soft pools of light onto nearly empty sidewalks. Office windows glow against the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a train passes slowly through the city, its whistle echoing gently across the night. Inside homes throughout America, families remain gathered around their televisions, searching for answers that have not yet fully emerged. The world feels quieter now. More reflective. More aware that it has witnessed a moment that future generations will continue to study. Take another slow breath. Allow the events of the day to settle softly in your thoughts, without urgency, without judgment. In our next chapter, we will leave Dallas for a time and board Air Force One, where one presidency came to its solemn conclusion and another quietly began. An extraordinary moment that reflected both the resilience of democratic institutions and the deep sadness of a nation in mourning. For now, rest comfortably. The pages of history continue to turn. And here, within the silent collection, we turn them together, one peaceful chapter at a time. Chapter 7, Air Force One and a New Beginning. As we continue our quiet journey together, allow yourself to settle even deeper into comfort. There is nothing expected of you now. The day is behind you. The night has become still. And somewhere beyond the walls around you, the world continues its gentle rhythm while we remain here, wandering slowly through one of history's most unforgettable afternoons. Take another slow breath, and let us return to Dallas. By the early afternoon of November 22, 1963, the atmosphere surrounding Love Field had changed completely. Only a few hours earlier, the airport had echoed with cheerful applause as President John F. Kennedy and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy stepped from Air Force One to greet smiling crowds. Now the same runway stood in solemn silence. The excitement had vanished. In its place came quiet conversations, measured footsteps, and the weight of a nation beginning to understand the enormity of what had happened. The aircraft remained where it had landed that morning, its polished blue and white exterior reflecting the warm Texas sunlight. From a distance, it looked exactly as it had only hours before. History often reminds us that places themselves do not change. Rather, it is our memories of them that become forever transformed. Government officials moved carefully between vehicles and the waiting aircraft. Secret Service agents maintained their positions with calm professionalism. Members of the White House staff spoke softly, their voices carrying only a few words before disappearing into the still afternoon air. Everyone understood that difficult responsibilities remained. The president would be returning to Washington, but he would not be making that journey in the way anyone had expected when the day began. Inside the aircraft, the familiar surroundings suddenly felt different. The conference table remained neatly arranged. Documents rested where they had been left. Coffee cups sat untouched. The quiet hum of electrical systems filled the cabin with a gentle background sound that seemed almost comforting amid the uncertainty. Cabin crew moved respectfully through the aisles, offering assistance wherever needed. No one spoke loudly. There seemed little need for conversation. The silence itself expressed what words could not. For Jacqueline Kennedy, the journey back to the aircraft must have felt almost unreal. Only hours earlier, she had smiled beside her husband as they greeted well-wishers beneath the bright Texas sky. The day had promised another successful stop on a political tour through Texas. Now everything had changed. Historians have often remarked upon Jacqueline Kennedy's remarkable composure during those difficult hours. Though she was experiencing unimaginable personal grief, she remained calm and dignified in public, a quiet strength that would later be remembered around the world. Her courage became one of the defining images of that tragic day. Meanwhile, the constitutional responsibilities of government continued. The United States Constitution provides a clear process for ensuring that leadership passes smoothly during times of crisis. That continuity is one of the enduring strengths of democratic institutions. Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson now carried an immense responsibility. Johnson, a seasoned politician from Texas, had served in Congress for many years before becoming vice president. Known for his deep understanding of government and his ability to work across political differences, he now faced circumstances no vice president ever hopes to encounter. His duty was clear. The nation required a president. Without delay, inside a modest section of Air Force One, preparations quietly began for the administration of the presidential oath. The cabin was not large. Those present stood closely together. Cabinet members, government officials, family members, Secret Service agents, photographers. Everyone recognized the extraordinary nature of the moment unfolding before them. There would be no grand ceremony, no crowds, no music, only a solemn constitutional obligation carried out with dignity. A federal judge, Sarah T. Hughes, was asked to administer the oath of office. She arrived at the aircraft and entered the cabin, where those gathered made space within the narrow aisle. The Bible traditionally used for such ceremonies was not immediately available, so another book was used instead. What mattered most was not the object itself. It was the commitment being made. Shortly after 2:30 in the afternoon, Lyndon Baines Johnson raised his right hand. The oath was spoken clearly, measured, deliberately. With those familiar words, the United States had a new president. The peaceful transfer of authority had occurred even in the midst of profound national tragedy. It was a quiet reminder that institutions, carefully built over generations, could endure even the most difficult moments. One photograph taken inside the aircraft would soon become one of the most recognized images in American history. President Johnson stands taking the oath. Judge Hughes reads the words before him. Around them are officials whose faces reflect the gravity of the occasion. Beside Johnson stands Jacqueline Kennedy, still wearing the same pink suit she had worn throughout the day. still carrying herself with remarkable dignity. The photograph captures not celebration, but resilience. A nation grieving. A government continuing. History moving forward, even when hearts wished it could pause. Not long afterward, Air Force One prepared for departure. Ground crews completed their final checks. The aircraft doors were secured. Engines gradually came to life. Their familiar rumble filled the airfield once more. Slowly, the aircraft began to taxi toward the runway. Those watching from below stood quietly. Many saluted. Others simply watched in respectful silence. The aircraft accelerated smoothly before lifting into the Texas sky. Its destination was Washington, D.C., the city to which President Kennedy had departed only days earlier. The city to which President Johnson would now return as Commander-in-Chief. As Air Force One climbed above the clouds, the landscape of Texas slowly disappeared beneath a blanket of afternoon haze. From above, the highways, neighborhoods, and rivers became tiny patterns upon the earth. The vastness of the American landscape stretched toward every horizon. Inside the aircraft, however, thoughts remained focused not upon geography, but upon the future. Government responsibilities continued. Communications were established with Washington. Plans were made for the days ahead. Despite the sadness surrounding them, officials understood that stability mattered. Millions of Americans looked to their government for reassurance. The continuity of leadership offered precisely that. Across the country, churches began opening their doors. Candles were lit. Prayer services were organized. People who had never met President Kennedy found themselves gathering with neighbors simply to share the weight of the day's news. Some spoke quietly. Others preferred silence. Both were understandable. Grief often takes many forms. For some, it is expressed through conversation. For others, through quiet reflection. History records the official events. But it is these small human moments, the neighbor offering comfort, the teacher embracing a student, the stranger holding a door open for another, that often reveal the true character of a nation. As evening approached, newspapers prepared special editions unlike any they had printed before. Printing presses that normally operated according to carefully planned schedules now worked continuously. Editors revised headlines repeatedly as new information arrived. Delivery trucks departed into the night carrying newspapers whose front pages would soon be preserved in museums, libraries, and family collections across the world. Many of those newspapers shared a common theme. Not simply the loss of a president, but the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. History teaches us that every generation experiences moments it never forgets. People remember where they were, what they were doing, who first told them the news. For many Americans alive in 1963, November 22 became one of those moments. A point in time forever connected with memory. Years later, people could still recall the classroom they sat in. The factory floor where work suddenly stopped. The kitchen radio that interrupted afternoon music. The office television around which colleagues quietly gathered. Individual memories joined together to form a shared national story. Yet tonight, as we continue our gentle journey, it is worth remembering something else. Even amid sorrow, the ordinary world continued. The sun slowly set over Texas. Birds settled into evening trees. Streetlights flickered to life. Families prepared supper. Children were tucked into bed. The rhythms of everyday life, though changed forever by memory, continued as they always had. History rarely stops the world completely. Instead, it becomes woven into the ordinary lives of millions of people, who continue living through it. Perhaps that is what makes history so deeply human. As we bring this chapter to its peaceful conclusion, imagine Air Force One flying steadily through the evening sky. Below, the lights of towns and cities begin appearing one by one, glowing softly against the gathering darkness. Inside the aircraft, conversation has become quiet. Outside, the stars are beginning to emerge. The journey home continues. So too does the story of a nation learning to move forward. Take one slow, comfortable breath. Allow the gentle hum of the aircraft to become like a lullaby carrying you toward rest. In our next chapter, we will arrive in Washington, where millions gathered to mourn, and where a nation came together to say farewell to its 35th president. For now, sleep peacefully. The silent collection will remain here, keeping watch over the quiet stories of the past until we meet again on the next page. Chapter 8: A Nation in Mourning. The night has grown quieter still. Perhaps your breathing has found a slow and gentle rhythm. Perhaps your thoughts have begun to wander somewhere between wakefulness and sleep. If that is the case, simply let them wander. History does not mind if you drift away for a little while. It has been patiently waiting for more than 60 years. It can wait a little longer. Our journey leaves Dallas behind and returns to the nation's capital, where the United States and much of the world prepared to bid farewell to President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. As Air Force One descended toward Washington, D.C., the sun had already begun its slow journey toward the western horizon. The familiar landmarks of the Capitol emerged beneath the aircraft. The broad ribbon of the Potomac River reflected the fading light. Monuments stood quietly against the skyline. Government buildings, which only that morning had carried on with ordinary business, now seemed wrapped in a profound stillness. The city was preparing not for celebration, but for mourning. When the aircraft landed, there were no welcoming crowds, no campaign banners, no cheerful music. Instead, military personnel, government officials, and members of the president's staff waited in respectful silence. Every movement was measured. Every gesture carried quiet dignity. Across Washington, flags had already been lowered to half-staff. Their gentle movement in the evening breeze became one of the defining images of those difficult days. Businesses closed their doors early. Schools dismissed students. Church bells rang softly across the city. In neighborhoods large and small, families gathered around dining tables, radios, and television sets, struggling to understand what had happened. Many found themselves speaking in hushed voices, almost instinctively, as though raising their voices might somehow disturb the solemn atmosphere that had settled across the country. Throughout the night, Americans continued arriving outside the White House. Some carried flowers. Others brought handwritten notes. Many brought nothing at all. They simply stood together in silence. There was comfort in being among strangers who shared the same sense of loss. People who had never met one another exchanged quiet nods. Some embraced. Others simply looked toward the White House, illuminated softly against the dark November sky. No speeches were necessary. The silence itself became a language everyone understood. Television remained on in millions of homes. Unlike today, there were only a handful of major television networks. For several days, nearly every channel devoted its programming to the events unfolding in Washington. News anchors, many of whom had scarcely left their studios, continued providing updates with remarkable professionalism. Their voices remained calm, measured, respectful. The pace of broadcasting itself seemed slower than modern audiences might expect. There was time for silence. Time for reflection. Time to acknowledge the weight of each announcement before moving to the next. In many ways, the television coverage mirrored the mood of the nation. Quiet, reflective, united. Within the White House, preparations quietly began for the state funeral. Such ceremonies are guided by long-established traditions, many of which stretch back generations. Military officers coordinated every detail with extraordinary precision. Routes were carefully planned. Ceremonial guards rehearsed their duties. Musicians prepared solemn compositions that had accompanied national mourning for many years. Everything was arranged not to impress, but to honor, to acknowledge a life of public service, to provide the nation with an opportunity to grieve together. Meanwhile, messages of condolence arrived from every corner of the globe. Kings and queens, presidents, prime ministers, religious leaders, ordinary citizens. Letters arrived by the thousands. Many expressed sympathy not only for Jacqueline Kennedy and her family, but for the American people as a whole. The tragedy in Dallas had crossed every border. It reminded the world that moments of sorrow often unite humanity more deeply than moments of triumph. Regardless of nationality or politics, countless people paused to reflect upon the fragility of life and leadership. As the days passed, Washington welcomed an extraordinary gathering of world leaders. They traveled from Europe, Asia, Africa, South America, the Middle East. Some had worked closely with President Kennedy during moments of international crisis. Others had met him only briefly. Still others knew him only through diplomacy and public appearances. Yet they came together for a common purpose: to pay their respects. It became one of the largest gatherings of international leaders in history at that time. The quiet streets of Washington filled with official motorcades, diplomatic vehicles, and military escorts, all moving with deliberate care through a city draped in mourning. Perhaps the most moving moments, however, belonged not to presidents or ambassadors, but to ordinary citizens. For hours, people stood patiently in long lines to pass by the place where President Kennedy lay in state. Some waited through the cold November night. Parents brought children wrapped warmly in coats and scarves. Elderly couples leaned gently upon one another. Veterans stood with quiet dignity. Young students, many seeing the nation's capital for the first time, joined the procession in respectful silence. The line moved slowly. No one seemed to mind. There was comfort in simply being present. Each person carried private thoughts, private memories, private reasons for coming. Yet together they formed a single, unbroken line of remembrance. On Monday, November the 25th, the day of the state funeral arrived. The weather had turned cooler. A gentle autumn breeze moved through the city as church bells rang once more. The streets of Washington filled long before the procession began. People stood several rows deep behind barriers. Many had traveled great distances simply to witness history with their own eyes. Others watched from office windows overlooking the route. Countless millions more watched from their homes across the world. For many, it remains one of the first truly global moments of shared television history. The funeral procession itself moved with remarkable grace. A horse-drawn military caisson carried the flag-draped coffin through the streets. The steady rhythm of the horse's hooves echoed softly against the pavement. Behind the caisson walked family members, government officials, military officers, and foreign dignitaries. No one hurried. Every step seemed deliberate, measured, almost timeless. Following behind came one of the ceremony's oldest military traditions. A riderless horse, its boots reversed in the stirrups. A symbol dating back centuries, representing a fallen leader taking one final look toward those left behind. The image was simple, yet profoundly moving. Then came one of the most enduring moments of the entire ceremony. Standing beside his mother was 3-year-old John Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. It was his birthday. As the procession passed, the young boy raised his tiny hand in a formal salute toward his father's coffin. The gesture lasted only a moment, yet photographs captured it forever. Across the world, millions watched in silence. It became one of the defining images not only of the funeral, but of an entire generation's memory. Sometimes history is remembered through speeches, sometimes through great achievements, and sometimes through the quiet dignity of a child saying goodbye. The procession eventually reached Arlington National Cemetery, overlooking the city President Kennedy had served. There, surrounded by family, friends, and leaders from around the world, the final ceremonies took place. Jacqueline Kennedy stepped forward to light an eternal flame. Its gentle fire flickered steadily despite the cool November breeze. Inspired by the flame at the tomb of the unknown soldier in Paris, she wished for a lasting symbol of remembrance. The flame has continued burning ever since. Day and night, season after season, year after year. Visitors from every corner of the world continue to stand before it in quiet reflection. Not simply remembering one man, but remembering an era, a generation, a moment that changed history. As we gently conclude this chapter, imagine the peaceful hillside of Arlington beneath the fading afternoon light. The eternal flame burns softly. Leaves drift slowly from nearby trees. The city of Washington stretches quietly into the distance. The sounds of the funeral have faded. Only the gentle breeze remains. History has reached another quiet turning point. Not an ending, but a moment of remembrance. Take another slow breath. Allow the calm stillness of Arlington to settle gently around you. In our next chapter, we will leave the ceremonies behind and explore the many years that followed, how investigators sought answers, how historians examined the evidence, and how the memory of President Kennedy continued to shape the world long after that November afternoon. For now, rest peacefully. The night is still, and within the silent collection, the story continues, one quiet page at a time. Chapter 9, Searching for the Truth. As our journey continues, the night has grown wonderfully quiet. Perhaps your room is dark now. Perhaps only the soft glow of a bedside lamp remains, or perhaps the moon itself has become your only companion. However you have arrived here tonight, I am grateful that you have chosen to spend these peaceful moments within the silent collection. History is often remembered through its great events. But after every great event comes something quieter. Questions, reflection, the slow work of understanding. Tonight, we leave behind the ceremonies and mourning to explore the years that followed, when investigators, historians, journalists, and ordinary citizens all searched for answers. In the days immediately following President Kennedy's funeral, life slowly began returning to its familiar rhythm. Government offices reopened. Schools welcomed students back into classrooms. Businesses resumed their ordinary routines. Newspapers returned to reporting everyday events. The world continued moving forward. Yet beneath that return to normal life remained a single question. What exactly had happened in Dallas? For many people, grief naturally gave way to curiosity. Not curiosity born from entertainment, but from a deeply human desire to understand. History often leaves us with questions, especially when its most significant moments arrive suddenly. Within days of the assassination, President Lyndon B. Johnson established a special investigative body that became known as the Warren Commission. Its purpose was both simple and enormously difficult: to examine every available piece of evidence, to interview witnesses, to review photographs and films, to analyze physical evidence, and ultimately to provide the American public with the most complete account possible of the events of November 22, 1963. The commission was chaired by Earl Warren, the Chief Justice of the United States, and included respected public servants from different branches of government. Their work would continue for many months. The investigation itself was enormous. Thousands of interviews were conducted. Thousands of pages of documents were collected. Photographs were carefully examined. Films were studied frame by frame. Maps of Dealey Plaza were recreated. Measurements were taken. Timelines were assembled with remarkable precision. Investigators sought not only to understand what had happened, but exactly when each event occurred. History often depends upon minutes, sometimes even seconds. Among the most important pieces of evidence was a short home movie captured by Abraham Zapruder. Earlier that afternoon, standing on a small concrete pedestal overlooking Elm Street, Zapruder had simply hoped to record the presidential motorcade for his family. His camera, a modest home movie camera, quietly documented only a few seconds of history. Yet those few seconds would become some of the most closely examined film ever recorded. Investigators returned to it repeatedly. Historians still study it today, not because it tells the entire story, but because it preserves one brief moment exactly as it unfolded. History occasionally leaves behind remarkable windows into the past. This film became one of them. The commission also examined testimony from hundreds of witnesses. Some had stood along the sidewalks. Others watched from office windows. Police officers, medical personnel, Secret Service agents, journalists, office workers. Each person contributed a small piece of the larger picture. As is often true during unexpected events, not every memory was identical. Some people remembered hearing sounds from one direction. Others believed they came from another. This is a natural part of human memory during moments of sudden shock. Modern psychologists understand that eyewitness testimony, while valuable, is rarely perfect. Memories are shaped not only by what we see, but by emotion, surprise, and the passage of time. For that reason, investigators compared witness accounts with photographs, films, and physical evidence before drawing conclusions. After months of careful work, the Warren Commission published its report in September of 1964. Its central conclusion was that Lee Harvey Oswald fired the shots that struck President Kennedy and that he acted alone. The report found no evidence of a larger conspiracy. For many Americans, the report answered important questions. For others, it raised new ones. History is sometimes like that. Even the most detailed investigations cannot always satisfy every doubt. Over the decades that followed, numerous additional studies revisited the assassination. Government agencies released millions of pages of documents. Independent researchers examined photographs. Authors wrote books presenting different interpretations. Television documentaries explored competing theories. Universities studied the historical context. The assassination became one of the most researched events of the 20th century. Few moments in modern history have received such sustained attention. Some theories suggested the involvement of organized crime. Others speculated about foreign governments. Still others proposed connections involving intelligence agencies or political groups. These ideas captured public imagination for many years. Most, however, have not been supported by convincing evidence. Historians generally distinguish between questions that remain open and claims that require stronger proof. That distinction is important. History is built not upon speculation, but upon evidence that can be carefully examined. Even today, while debate continues in some areas, no alternative explanation has achieved broad agreement among historians. One of the enduring lessons of the Kennedy assassination is not simply about the event itself. It is about the importance of careful historical thinking. When dramatic events occur, stories often spread quickly. Rumors appear. Assumptions are made. New theories emerge. The role of the historian is different. To ask gentle questions. To examine sources patiently. To compare evidence fairly. And to remain willing to revise conclusions when reliable new information appears. In many ways, history resembles assembling an enormous puzzle. Most pieces fit together clearly. A few remain difficult to place. The picture becomes sharper with time, though perhaps never perfectly complete. As the years passed, Dealey Plaza itself gradually changed. Not dramatically. The roads remained. The railway bridge still crossed above the street. The old Texas School Book Depository continued standing at its familiar corner. Yet visitors now arrived from around the world. Some came because they had lived through the events of 1963. Others belonged to younger generations who knew the story only through books and documentaries. Many simply wished to stand in the place where history had unfolded. Today, the former Texas School Book Depository houses a museum dedicated to examining the life, presidency, assassination, and legacy of John F. Kennedy. Visitors walk quietly through exhibits filled with photographs, documents, personal belongings, and historical displays. Many describe the experience not as dramatic, but reflective. The museum encourages visitors to consider both the historical facts and the broader significance of that remarkable day. Elsewhere, President Kennedy's legacy continued growing. Schools, libraries, airports, roads, parks, scholarship programs, research institutions. Across the United States and throughout the world, places were named in his honor. His speeches continued, inspiring new generations. His call to public service remained widely quoted. His commitment to the space program helped pave the way for the Apollo missions that would eventually place human beings upon the moon less than 6 years after his death. His support for civil rights, though unfinished during his lifetime, became an important chapter in the broader movement toward greater equality in America. History remembers individuals not only for how they died, but for what they hoped to accomplish while they lived. Perhaps that is why President Kennedy continues to fascinate historians. His presidency lasted only 1,036 days, just under 3 years. Yet within that relatively short time, he guided the nation through moments of extraordinary tension, including the Cuban Missile Crisis, challenged Americans to look toward the stars, and encouraged citizens to think of service before self. Whether one agrees with every decision he made or not, his influence upon 20th century history remains unmistakable. As we quietly approach the end of this chapter, imagine Dealey Plaza as it appears today. The busy traffic has returned. Visitors stroll slowly beneath the trees. The afternoon sun casts familiar shadows across the grass. The old brick buildings remain remarkably unchanged. Only the passage of time reminds us that decades have gone by. History has settled gently upon the place, not erasing the past, but inviting thoughtful reflection rather than hurried judgment. Take one slow breath. Feel the calm stillness of the evening. The search for understanding continues, just as history always continues. In our final chapter, we will step back from the events themselves and reflect upon what they have meant, not only for America, but for the way all of us remember the past, preserve its lessons, and carry its stories into the future. For now, rest comfortably. The shelves of the Silent Collection hold many stories. Tonight, only one remains to be told. Chapter 10, The Echoes of History. We have arrived at the final chapter of tonight's journey. If you are still listening, thank you for allowing me to accompany you through these quiet hours. And if sleep has already begun to carry you gently toward dreams, then let these final pages become little more than a soft voice in the distance, like the quiet turning of ancient pages in a forgotten library. There is nowhere else to be. Nothing more to accomplish today. Only one last story to finish before the night grows still. History has an unusual way of changing the meaning of ordinary places. A quiet street becomes a place of remembrance. An old building becomes a museum. A photograph becomes a symbol. A single afternoon becomes a chapter studied by generations who were not yet born when it happened. Before November 22, 1963, Dealey Plaza was simply another intersection in a growing American city. Today, people travel from every corner of the world to stand there. Some arrive with cameras. Some carry books filled with notes and historical photographs. Others come with no particular purpose beyond quiet reflection. Many simply stand for a few moments beneath the Texas sky, imagining what the plaza looked like on that warm autumn afternoon. They soon discover something surprising. It is remarkably peaceful. Cars continue to pass. The trees sway gently in the breeze. Birds occasionally settle on the stone walls. Life continues. History has become part of the landscape, not by changing it, but by changing the way people see it. Perhaps that is one of history's greatest lessons. The places where extraordinary events occur rarely appear extraordinary themselves. A battlefield eventually becomes a meadow. An ancient castle becomes a tourist attraction. A busy harbor becomes a place for evening walks. The world quietly heals while continuing to remember. Time does not erase history. It simply places it gently within a larger story. President John Fitzgerald Kennedy served as President of the United States for 1,036 days. In the grand timeline of history, that is only a brief chapter. Yet those years contained moments that shaped the modern world. The establishment of the Peace Corps encouraged thousands of young Americans to serve communities across the globe. The challenge to land a human being on the moon inspired scientists, engineers, and dreamers alike. His speeches often invited citizens to think not only about government, but about personal responsibility. One sentence, spoken during his inaugural address in January of 1961, has become one of the most recognized lines in modern political history. He encouraged Americans to ask what they could do for their country, rather than what their country could do for them. More than 6 decades later, those words continue to appear in classrooms, museums, documentaries, and history books around the world. They remain part of his enduring legacy. History, however, is never the story of one person alone. Behind every president stand thousands of others. Secretaries and advisors, police officers and journalists, teachers and factory workers, doctors and nurses, parents and children, Every generation contributes quietly to the larger human story. On November 22, 1963, millions of ordinary people experienced the same day from different perspectives. A school child waving a paper flag, a police officer directing traffic, a nurse beginning an afternoon shift, a television journalist preparing the evening news. None of them expected to become witnesses to history. Yet all of them carried memories that would remain for the rest of their lives. Many historians have described the 1960s as a decade of extraordinary transformation. Technology advanced rapidly. Space exploration captured imaginations around the world. Music, art, and culture evolved at remarkable speed. Society itself wrestled with profound questions about equality, freedom, and the future. The assassination of President Kennedy did not create those changes, but it became one of the defining moments through which many people remember that remarkable decade. History often gives names to entire eras. The Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, the Space Age. Yet people living through those times rarely realize they are experiencing history. They simply wake each morning, drink their coffee, greet their neighbors, and go about their ordinary lives. Only later do historians gather those ordinary days together and give them names. There is something comforting in that thought. Every ordinary day matters, not because it will necessarily appear in a history book, but because it forms part of the quiet story of someone's life. The people who lined the streets of Dallas that November morning had no idea they would one day describe those moments to grandchildren. The doctors at Parkland Memorial Hospital could not know their names would appear in countless historical accounts. The photographers who developed their film that evening never imagined their images would be studied decades later. History belongs not only to famous people. It belongs to everyone, every family, every community, every generation. Today, visitors continue to leave flowers at President Kennedy's grave in Arlington National Cemetery. The eternal flame burns with the same quiet steadiness it has maintained since November of 1963. School groups visit museums to learn about his presidency. Researchers continue examining newly released government records, not because they expect history to change dramatically, but because historians are always seeking a fuller understanding of the past. That quiet search for knowledge is, perhaps, one of humanity's finest traditions. To remain curious, to remain thoughtful, to learn, not in order to relive the past, but to better understand the present. And now, as our journey draws to a close, let us return one final time to that peaceful November morning. Imagine Dallas before the crowds arrived. The streets are still. The city is only beginning to wake. Sunlight stretches across the brick buildings. A shopkeeper unlocks a front door. A newspaper delivery truck rumbles softly along an empty street. Somewhere coffee is brewing. Church bells mark the hour. Children prepare excitedly for the chance to see the president. Everything feels wonderfully ordinary. There is a quiet beauty in ordinary mornings. History often reminds us not to overlook them, for they are the moments from which every extraordinary story begins. Perhaps tonight's journey has been about more than the life of one president. Perhaps it has also been about memory, about kindness, about resilience, about the remarkable way societies continue moving forward while honoring those they have lost. Every generation inherits stories from the generations before it. Some are joyful, some are difficult. All deserve to be remembered with honesty, compassion, and care. That is why places like museums exist. Why libraries preserve old letters and newspapers. Why historians continue reading dusty archives. Why families pass stories from grandparents to grandchildren. Because remembering is one way we remain connected across time. Here within the silent collection, that is our purpose as well. Not to sensationalize history, not to rush through it, but to slow down, to notice the quieter moments that often escape our attention, to remember that behind every famous headline were ordinary people living ordinary lives until history unexpectedly knocked upon their door. Those quieter moments are where history often feels most human, and perhaps most comforting. As the evening settles into silence, picture an old library lit by the warm glow of a single brass lantern. Tall wooden shelves stretch upward into darkness. Thousands of books rest patiently, each containing another journey waiting to begin. Some tell stories of explorers crossing unknown oceans. Others speak of ancient kingdoms long vanished. Some whisper of scientific discoveries that changed the world. Others simply preserve the lives of ordinary people whose stories might otherwise have been forgotten. Tonight, we have carefully returned one volume to its shelf. The story of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Tomorrow night, another volume may be waiting. Another quiet journey. Another forgotten afternoon. Another remarkable chapter from the endless archive of history. Before we part, allow yourself one final slow breath. Feel the gentle rise and fall of your breathing. Notice how quiet the room has become. The day is over now. Whatever tomorrow may bring can wait until morning. For this moment, there is only stillness, only peace, only rest. Thank you for joining me for tonight's journey through history. Until we meet again, may your evening be peace.